Okay, so we're diving deep into grit today. Angela Duckworth's Grit, the power of passion and perseverance.
It's such a good one.
Right, like everyone's talking about it, but we're going deeper than usual today, like really unpacking her research and what are those really surprising examples and what are the most useful takeaways, really?
I think it's so interesting how Duckworth doesn't just talk about grit, but she actually measures it. And to understand how she does that, let's actually start with her early work at West Point, where she developed the grit scale.
Yeah, her research at West Point is fascinating. I was reading about beast barracks, and oh my goodness, it sounds brutal. No weekends, barely any breaks. Talk about pushing yourself to your limits.
That's exactly why she chose it, specifically Beast Barracks. She wanted to figure out what made some cadets thrive under that insane pressure while others dropped out, even if they seemed equally qualified on paper.
So it wasn't their test scores or how fit they were that determined if they'd make it.
No, not at all. Duckworth found that the cadets who scored high on her, newly developed grit scale were way more likely to persevere through beast barracks. And get this, grit was a stronger predictor of success than like SAT scores or class rank.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really makes you think,
Okay.
it's not just about like natural talent, but the amount of passion and perseverance you bring to the table, which actually, it wasn't just West Point where this pattern showed up, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Her findings at West Point were just the beginning. She went on to research grit in so many other tough areas too, like sales, spelling bees, even the Special Forces selection process. And guess what? Same pattern. Those who are high in grit outperformed.
I thought the sales example was really interesting. It's not just that grittier salespeople last longer in a job where you're constantly told no.
Yeah.
It's how they view those rejections. Each no isn't a personal failure. It's like a stepping stone. Like, okay, one step closer to yes.
Such a good point. It's not just working harder, it's working smarter, more strategically, having that long-term vision and not being thrown off by, little setbacks along the way.
It's like she says in the book, talent is how quickly you improve, but effort is the engine. And when you've got both working together, that's when amazing things happen, I think.
It really is. It's passion and perseverance, that combination consistently over time. That's what makes high achievers stand out. And speaking of passion and perseverance, they're both key parts of grit. It's important to really get how they're different but work together.
Yeah, I was really struck by that distinction too. It's easy to use them interchangeably, but it's more like two sides of the same coin, right?
Definitely. Let's start with passion. Passion is that deep, lasting interest in something. It's like the fire in your belly.
It draws you to something, right? Like a field or a craft or even just a goal.
Right.
But, and we saw this with Jeffrey Gettleman, the journalist, who won a Pulitzer, by the way. Passion isn't always like, bam, there it is. Like, he didn't start out dying to be a journalist. It actually grew from his love of photography and then being, like, really interested in Africa.
Yeah, and that's so important for people to hear, especially if you feel like you need to have it all figured out right now. Duckworth talks about how passion often starts with just exploring, seeing what sparks your interest, and then what holds your interest.
I love that it's like you don't download it, you discover it, which is actually really reassuring because I don't know about you, but I feel pulled in a million directions sometimes, and that's okay. It's about actually engaging with those interests, seeing where they go.
I agree. It's a process for sure.
And then that brings us to perseverance, right?
Yeah,
Which is all about the sustained effort.
exactly. It's sticking with those goals even when you really feel like giving up. When you hit obstacles or want to quit, it's about pushing through.
You fall down, you get back up again, right?
Yeah.
And a big part of perseverance that Duckworth talks about is deliberate practice.
Yes. It's something we've all heard, but she breaks it down in a way that's actually really helpful.
It's not just about putting in the hours. It's about the quality of those hours.
Right.
So it's intentional, structured, not just going through the motions.
Great. Deliberate practice is about setting a goal that's just a bit beyond what you can do now, focusing on that goal completely, getting feedback that you can actually use, and then like refining everything based on that.
And she makes a point of saying it's different from being in flow state, which is when you're so engrossed in what you're doing that you lose track of time.
Right. And both are important for like really mastering something.
But they're different.
Yeah. Think of it like this. Deliberate practice is the training an Olympic athlete does. Flow state is what they experience when they're actually competing at the Olympics.
I like that. That makes sense. So we've got passion, the deep interest, and we've got perseverance, the effort. But then there's something else, right? Like
Yeah.
what keeps us going when things are hard?
That's where purpose comes in. Duckworth says that purpose, that desire to do something bigger than yourself, is often what fuels grit. It's about connecting your goals to something larger, believing what you do matters, you know?
And I think it can be easy to think it has to be this big save the world type thing, but it doesn't,
Mm.
right? Like
Yeah.
purpose can be wanting to be a good influence on your family or your community, or even just being a little better each day.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's about finding meaning in your efforts
Cool.
and connecting them to something that matters to you.
Right, exactly. It's that personal connection that really makes a difference when you're doubting yourself or feeling frustrated.
It really does, yeah. And speaking of overcoming challenges, Duckworth also talks about mindset and how important it is for building grit, especially learned optimism and growth mindset. These aren't just trendy terms, they're really powerful tools for navigating setbacks and bouncing back.
And learned optimism, for anyone who hasn't heard that term before, it's how we explain, like, our failures or setbacks to ourselves.
Right.
Like, instead of thinking it's permanent or our fault, we learn to see those moments as temporary and as specific challenges we can overcome.
Right, like you reframe those negative thoughts and focus on what you can control, not what you can't. Instead of saying, oh, I'm terrible at this, someone with learned optimism would say, okay, I need to switch up my approach here and try again.
It's about not giving up your power, that belief that you can influence what happens, even when things are tough.
I love that, not giving up your power.
Right.
That's so good.
And this actually connects to growth mindset too, which Carol Dweck talks a lot about.
Yes.
Growth mindset is believing that our intelligence and talents aren't fixed, that we can develop and grow them if we put in the effort and learning and if we're persistent.
It's like instead of being afraid of challenges, you see them as a way to grow. Setbacks become feedback, not proof that you're not good enough.
What's really cool about learned optimism and growth mindset is that they're not like you're born with them or you're not. They're skills,
They are.
and we can get better at them,
Yeah.
like with practice and by being intentional.
Exactly. And it's not just about our own mindset either. Duckworth talks about building a culture of grit, which is really interesting, especially in places like schools and workplaces.
She talks about Anson Dorrance, the really successful coach of the UNC women's soccer team.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
He is all about creating this gritty team culture, and it's a big reason why his teams are so amazing.
It's incredible. He really cultivates it within his team. Like half of his core values are all about teamwork and grit commitment, not giving up, always going for excellence. And he doesn't just talk the talk. He makes those values a part of everything the team does, their training, everything.
He even has them take the grit scale. He's like building a team of grit superheroes. It's kind of awesome.
I love it.
It really shows you how these tools, they aren't just for us individually. They're for our teams, workplaces, families too.
100%.
So how do we do that? How do we create environments where grit can grow? What are some takeaways from the book?
Well, you've got to start by figuring out what your core values are, what qualities are absolutely essential for success in your world. Once you know those values, it's about weaving them into every single part of your culture. How you hire, how you train people, how you celebrate wins, and even how you handle setbacks.
Creating those opportunities for people to actually practice being gritty, to push themselves beyond their comfort zone.
Yes.
And really importantly, to learn from mistakes in a supportive environment.
It's about giving feedback that's actually helpful, recognizing effort alongside talent, and making sure communication is open and honest. Duckworth actually talks a lot about how important transparency is.
It's like what Pete Carroll does, the coach of the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah.
He's big on open communication, always explaining why he makes the decisions he does, about the team's goals. It creates this feeling of shared purpose and understanding, which is huge when things get tough, right?
It is. It's like everyone's rowing together, even when the water gets rough.
And that actually leads us to another fascinating thing about grit. It spreads.
It's contagious, right?
Yes. Duckworth calls it a social multiplier effect. One person's grit can actually make the people around them grittier.
I love that. Like, we see someone else pushing through, sticking with it, and it makes us want to do the same. It becomes this shared value, this commitment to being excellent together.
Exactly. And there's research on this. Duckworth mentions a study where they found that lab rats who had to work harder for their food, they actually were more persistent when it came to learning a new skill compared to the rats who got food easily.
Wow, really?
It's crazy. Even small changes to our environment can seriously affect our grit.
We're hardwired to rise to the occasion, especially when we see other people doing it too.
Think about the military. They're amazing at creating a culture of grit.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just expected, it's woven into everything they do. It's in their uniforms, how they train, the words they use. It all builds that teamwork, discipline, that perseverance, even when things are really, really hard.
And a huge part of that is the camaraderie, that feeling of belonging. They have that shared purpose, knowing you're fighting alongside people you trust and respect, and for a cause that you believe in.
So we've talked about the benefits of grit for us individually and for our culture, how it can help us succeed, in school, work, relationships, all of it. But we should probably also talk about the potential downsides, right? Like,
Yeah.
can you have too much passion and perseverance?
Right. And to Duckworth's credit, she doesn't shy away from that at all. She's really upfront about the fact that her research is focused on the positive side of grit. But more research needs to be done on the potential downsides of only caring about achievement.
Yeah, because as great as grit can be, it has to be balanced, right? Like, we don't want to achieve great things at the expense of our health or relationships or other important parts of our lives.
Yeah, for sure. Finding that balance is key. It's not about neglecting those other important areas of life.
It's like that classic story, right? Someone works themselves to the bone, becomes super successful, but then their health is gone, their family's distant.
It's a good reminder that we need to be careful.
For sure. So to circle back, we were talking about the potential downsides of grit.
Right. And it's important to acknowledge that while grit can be an incredible driver of success, like anything else, taking it to an extreme can have its drawbacks.
Absolutely. Duckworth even touches on the potential dangers of unchecked grit. Like, imagine a ruthless dictator or a CEO who's so fixated on profits that they completely disregard ethics.
It's like that saying, power corrupts. Grit, as powerful as it is, needs a strong moral compass.
Right. It's not enough to just have grit. You have to use it for the right reason.
Exactly. And that ties into something really important that Duckworth emphasizes throughout the book. It's about character.
She talks about eulogy virtues versus resume virtues, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Such a powerful distinction. Because we all know those resume virtues, right? The skills, achievements, the stuff we use to prove ourselves in our careers.
But then there are the eulogy virtues, the things people will remember you for long after you're gone.
Like what kind of person you were you kind, generous, compassionate?
The impact you had on others, your legacy, all of that.
It really makes you think about what really matters at the end of the day, doesn't it?
It does. It's like success isn't just about what you accomplish. It's also about who you are along the way.
It's about striving to be a good human, not just a successful one.
Exactly. And I think that's a really good place to leave it for today.
Yeah, it's about finding that sweet spot, where you're pushing yourself, but not at the cost of everything else.
It's like we want to look back and be proud of what we accomplished, but not if it meant sacrificing our health or our relationships along the way.
Exactly. We've got to find that balance.
So to kind of bring it all together, yeah, we've been talking about grit and all its different angles. And I think one of the most important things Duckworth highlights is that it's not just about, like, going full steam ahead all the time.
It's not just about, working yourself to the bone and ignoring everything else.
Right. It's about being intentional.
Yeah.
Like, where do we want to direct that energy and why?
Absolutely. And recognizing that there are different ways to live a meaningful life.
It's not one size fits all.
Not at all. And I think that's actually a really empowering message, because it means we get to define what success looks like for us.
I love that. It's about figuring out what matters most to you and then using grit as a tool to help you get there.
Exactly. And remembering that it's a journey, not a destination, right?
That's like we're always growing and evolving, and our definition of success might too.
Exactly. And that's okay.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into grit, what's one thing you hope our listeners take away from it?
I hope they walk away feeling inspired and empowered to embrace challenges, because that's where the real growth happens.
I love that. And to remember that grit isn't about being perfect. It's about being persistent.
So well said. It's about getting back up even when it's hard.
And knowing that you don't have to do it alone.
Yes. Find your people. Build that support system.
Because at the end of the day, we're all capable of cultivating more grit.
We all have that potential within us.
That's it for this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.